Gildan Media presents Your Coach in a Box, affordable, life-changing audio programs.
The End of the Suburbs, Where the American Dream is Moving. Written by Leigh Gallagher. Narrated by Jessica Geffen. For Mom, Dad, and Drew. Introduction. We shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us. Winston Churchill. Aaron Ralston looks out at the 2,500 people gathered in the Valencia Ballroom at the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando. You know Ralston. He's the guy who got trapped by a boulder for 5 days while hiking in southeastern Utah in 2003 and cut off his arm with a dull knife to escape. The ordeal made him a celebrity and a sought-after motivational speaker. On this day in 2012, Ralston is here to kick off the opening ceremonies at the International Builders Show, the annual gathering of the American home building industry put on by the National Association of Home Builders, NAHB. The theme, Overcoming Adversity. I'm looking at several thousand survivors right now, Ralston says somberly. He acknowledges that the executives and industry members in the room have just come through the Great Recession, which inflicted epic, unprecedented levels of pain on their business. He is here, he tells his audience, to help them see their struggle as a gift, to help them find what he calls the blessings in your boulders. For the next half hour, Ralston tells the story of his own ordeal, how a sunny hike in a remote, undeveloped section of Canyonlands National Park, an area he quips could be a ripe market for builders, turned into a life-changing event when an 800-pound boulder dislodged and landed on top of him, crushing his right forearm and pinning him inside a canyon. He chronicles the events of the following 5 days, how after futile attempts to free himself, he sipped his remaining water, drank his own urine, videotaped goodbyes to his parents, and carved his presumed date of death into the sandstone. But then, he recounts the stroke of joy, the eureka moment he felt when he suddenly realized he could break his own bones, sever his arm, and have a chance at surviving. He describes the process in wrenching detail. Hitting the nerve was like liquid metal, he says, but he emphasizes that the actual act of cutting was a beautiful thing. I stepped out of my grave, he says. When he passed out after he was rescued, it wasn't from pain, he tells the audience. It was from joy. At this point, a low murmur starts to roll through the crowd. Someone in the back row has himself passed out and needs attention. Soon, there is a rustle closer to the stage. Another person has fallen faint. Ralston stops his speech for several minutes while emergency crews enter. A third call for help comes from the left section of the audience. Then a fourth. Someone next to me leans over and whispers in concern, "Could it be food poisoning?" It wasn't. Ralston's speeches have incited physical reactions before, but this is the first time he's ever had to stop his act and the first time more than one person has succumbed. It was like a chain reaction, he said later. They basically ran out of paramedics. After the ill are revived and wheeled out, Ralston steps forward on the stage and resumes, tactfully acknowledging the intensity of his story. Then he brings the message home. It might be a challenge to look at this as the greatest thing that's ever happened to you, he tells the crowd, but he encourages them to see it that way. You all have that same strength, he says, to make your boulders your blessings. The home building industry circa February 2012 could use some blessings. In the 5 years since the mortgage bubble burst, setting off the Great Recession and leaving many homeowners underwater, the industry has been gutted. Hundreds of companies have gone bankrupt. Attendance at the show this week is around 50,000, half the 100,000 or more at its height in 2006. 3 years after the recession officially ended, things are still grim. By the time of this writing, the situation would come to improve markedly. But as the attendees sit here listening to Ralston, they are sitting in their own ravine, the bottom of the wrenching housing bust. A fresh set of numbers have just confirmed it. Single-family housing starts, the number of privately owned housing units on which construction has begun, and new home sales each hit new lows in 2011. More than 11 million homeowners are still underwater. And despite rock-bottom interest rates and prices that dropped 34% nationwide and much more in some areas, here in February 2012, people still aren't buying. The Standard & Poor's Index of home building stocks lost 71% of its value between 2006 and 2012, nearly twice as much as other troubled industries like publishing and airlines. It is these statistics that have brought me to Orlando. Although the entire housing market, and indeed the entire country, has felt the pain of the recession, I'm here to explore the effect it has had on one specific area, our suburbs, that broad catch-all descriptor for the vast landscape of leafy, low-density residential enclaves that house the majority of our 312 million people. Because more Americans live in the suburbs than anywhere else, it is where the builders in the room do the overwhelming majority of their business. The housing crisis, in which the binging on residential mortgages led to the overbuilding of millions of homes, hit the suburbs especially hard. Builders erected more single-family houses than at almost any time in history, and covered record amounts of farmland with new subdivisions. Many of those houses now sit empty. Anyone who has read a newspaper over the past couple of years might reasonably deduce that the suburbs have been in some trouble lately. Statistics and articles about the pain being inflicted on our bedroom communities have been appearing almost since the financial crisis began, citing not just the number of foreclosures among American homeowners, but related issues like the rise in crime and poverty in suburban communities. "The death of the fringe suburb," read one recent headline. "Struggling in the suburbs," said another. A third declared, "The housing crisis could end suburbia as we know it." Meanwhile, a cache of articles, papers, and popular books has heralded the resurgence of cities. But what the headlines miss is that while much of the hurt can be blamed on the recent recession and its immediate effects, there are larger trends at work. Many of the suburbs affected by the housing crisis are not experiencing a temporary setback, but a permanent one, the result of a powerful tectonic shift whose forces have been grinding away for quite some time. When I set out to write a book in the spring of 2011, I originally planned to explore the future of our economy and how the after-effects of the financial crisis would be permanent changes to various aspects of our lives. But the more I researched, the more I discovered that the most dramatic shift involved where and how we choose to live, and it wasn't a result of the Great Recession at all. Rather, the housing crisis only concealed something deeper and more profound happening to what we have come to know as American suburbia. Simply speaking, more and more Americans don't want to live there anymore. The reasons are varied, but several disparate factors all point to a decrease in demand for traditional suburban living. Many Americans are tiring of the physical aspect of the suburbs, the design of which has changed dramatically over the years to gradually spread people farther and farther apart from one another and the things they like to do, making them increasingly reliant on their cars and increasingly on Thelma and Louise-length commutes. Big demographic shifts are seeing our population grow older, younger, and more diverse seemingly all at once, while powerful social trends are shrinking and transforming the American nuclear family, long the dominant driver of suburbia. An epic financial crisis, coupled with the rising cost of energy, has made punishing commutes also unaffordable, while a newfound hyper-awareness of environmental issues has shaken up and reordered our priorities in a way that stand in direct conflict to the suburban way of life. This has all been happening for years, but it's now being backed up by data. The rate of suburban population growth has outpaced that of urban centers in every decade since the invention of the automobile. But in 2011, for the first time in 100 years, that trend reversed. Construction permit data shows that in several cities, building activity that was once concentrated in the suburban fringe has now shifted primarily to cities, or what planners call the urban core. At the same time, demand for the large, single-family homes that characterize the suburbs is dwindling, and big suburban home builders like Toll Brothers are saying their best markets are now cities. Many of the builders present at the NAHB show in Orlando know this and have started changing the way they do business. Like Ralston, they've started breaking their own bones by tearing up old floor plans, adjusting land acquisition strategies, and shifting their focus to include smaller houses and more urban developments. "Gone are the master bathrooms you can land planes in," said Boyce Thompson, the editorial director of the Builder group of magazines at the housing research and publishing firm Hanley Wood, during a presentation on market trends. Many of the attendees took part in educational sessions on multifamily housing units, design strategies for a shifting market, and the changing preferences of the new home buyer. During one such session, the audience watched an ad for builder Shea Homes' New Spaces line, in which pleasant-looking suburbanites talked about what they wanted in their new homes. "A typical home in the suburbs for me?" one housewife asks. "It's just not the way things are done anymore." The 2012 annual Builder magazine concept home at the show, always an important barometer of where housing trends are headed, was instead a series of 3 different homes targeted to 3 different generations, all featuring smaller, or right-sized, since small is still a word that goes unsaid by this group, floor plans, and more efficient use of space. Change is the only path to tomorrow. Larry Swank, chairman of the NAHB's Conventions and Meetings Committee and a leading builder in Indiana, advised an audience in a breakout session. Not every home builder is hurting. Floating around at the NAHB show were people like John McClendon, a longtime builder in Chicago who had spent the past few years developing a kind of replacement for the conventional subdivision, a neighborhood of compact, upscale bungalows steps from the train station in the middle of Libertyville, Illinois. His sales were going gangbusters. "Nothing exists like this, certainly not in the suburbs," he told me eagerly. "And we did it in the midst of a housing crisis." Indeed, one of the biggest trends in home building right now is remaking our suburbs to look more, well, urban. Like McClendon, developers in suburbs from Morristown, New Jersey, to Leesburg, Virginia, to Lakewood, Colorado, are rebuilding their downtowns as urbanized centers with streets that combine stores, restaurants, and apartments, while nearly every home builder now has a townhouse or condo division. Even Toll Brothers, the Horsham, Pennsylvania-based home builder that rose to fame on the wings of the suburban mega home, says what it calls its suburban move-up houses are now roughly 50% of what it builds and sells, down from 70 to 80% just a few years ago. This brings me to an important point. When I talk about the end of the suburbs, I do not mean to suggest that all suburban communities are going to vaporize. Plenty of older suburbs are going strong for reasons we'll explore later, and many newer suburbs are reinventing themselves to adapt to the times. But when the people who have delivered the same kind of one-size-fits-all suburban subdivisions over the past few decades are tearing up their blueprints, venturing gingerly into urban markets, and actually fainting at the thought of what the future holds, something big is afoot. The reliable expansion of our suburbs, the steady growth of the housing industry, and the seemingly unending supply of new single-family homes and homeowners that we became used to over the past several decades may well be a thing of the past. Robert Shiller, a Yale University economist, founder of the Case-Shiller home price indices, and the forecaster who predicted both the dot-com and housing bubbles, has said we may be in for a new normal. According to Shiller, U.S. suburban development since the 1950s was unusual in its reliance on the automobile and the highway system. The bursting of the bubble may result in a bigger, more structural change. The heyday of exurbs may well be behind us, he has said. Suburban prices may not recover in our lifetime. The suburbs have been the dominant pattern of residential growth in America for the last century. There are roughly 132 million homes across the country, the largest percent of them, almost half, in the suburbs, somewhat obtusely defined by the U.S. Census Bureau as the parts of our metropolitan statistical areas that lie outside central cities. Looking at the broadly defined metropolitan regions of our country, which is where more than 80% of Americans live, the percentage of us living in the suburbs is higher, 61%. To get a sense of their scale, consider that there are an estimated 64 million houses in suburbia. Over the past half-century, the portion of people living in the suburbs has steadily grown, from 31% in 1960 to 51% in 2010, which amounts to about 158 million Americans. In terms of sheer size, not for a long time have the suburbs been sub. Of course, it's hard to paint the suburbs with one brush. Even the term suburb refers to many things. Broadly speaking, it refers to residential neighborhoods on the outskirts of big cities. But the American suburbs are a variegated terrain, a massive amalgam of thousands of different types and vintages. There are older, stately ones in the Northeast with centuries-old stone houses and newer ones all over the country, in subdivisions lined with tracts of mass-produced homes. There are wealthy enclaves like the Main Line of Philadelphia, or the North Shore of Chicago, or Shaker Heights, Ohio, or Atherton, California, and blue-collar mainstays like Yonkers, New York, or Cicero, Illinois. There are big ones and small ones, boroughs and hamlets, inner ring ones and ex-urban ones, hilly ones and flat ones. There are large swaths of suburbia, like the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles or New York's Long Island, that are the size of small countries. Suburbs look different depending where you live. In Las Vegas, front yards are filled with pebbles and cacti. In California, Mediterranean red-tiled roofs rule the day, and in wealthy suburbs throughout the Northeast, regal old homes line leafy streets. Despite their differences, the American suburbs share one thing in common. They evoke a certain way of life, one of tranquil, curving streets and cul-de-sacs, marching bands and soccer leagues, bake sales and PTA meetings, and Center Hall colonials. The phrase, the American dream, immediately brings to mind images of the single-family home with a white picket fence. The suburbs have also provided the setting for so many of our iconic cinematic moments. They are where Macaulay Culkin got left home alone, where Ferris Bueller took the day off, where Jake kissed Samantha in 16 Candles, and where Joel Goodson, thereafter remembered only as Tom Cruise, first strutted his stuff in Risky Business. The suburbs are innately connected to America because they are a uniquely American phenomenon. No other country has such an enormous percentage of its middle class living at such low densities across such massive amounts of land. As Kenneth T. Jackson put it in his masterful book Crabgrass Frontier, The Suburbanization of the United States, affluent and middle-class Americans live in suburban areas that are far from their workplaces, in homes that they own, and in the center of yards that, by urban standards elsewhere, are enormous. This might be a good time to mention that even though I'm writing a book about the decline of the suburbs, I don't have anything against them personally. I currently live in Manhattan's West Village, the former stomping ground of the legendary urbanist Jane Jacobs. But I had a pretty idyllic childhood growing up in Media, Pennsylvania, a suburb 12 miles southwest of Philadelphia. I lived in an old stone house in a leafy neighborhood called Bowling Green, which had a lot to offer a family like mine. A house with a lawn, a neighborhood full of kids, and the great Wallingford-Swarthmore Public School District, of which our slice of Media was a part. I have gauzy, sepia-toned Wonder Years-style memories of my childhood in Media. Most of the houses in Bowling Green dated back to the 1920s. Ours was a 1923 stone colonial, and the streets were lined with majestic oaks that dated back who knows how long. The epicenter of the neighborhood was a place called Triangle, where Mulberry Road and Truepenny Road converged in a T-intersection, forming a wider paved area that provided us kids with a place to hang out, to roller skate, and to hold street hockey tournaments. In the summer, the Triangle also played home to the neighborhood's annual 4th of July picnic, an all-day affair during which parents would close the streets to traffic, set up half a dozen picnic tables, and wheel their grills out from their backyards. This was the party to end all parties, as far as I was concerned. There were organized three-legged races and water balloon tosses, Mrs. Desmond's famous flag cake, and a bicycle parade for which we kids would decorate our bikes and ride them proudly once around the block. I can still remember eagerly threading the spokes of my Schwinn with red, white, and blue streamers in the hope of taking the top prize. The real highlight came at the end of the day, when the professional square dancing caller would arrive. He'd set up a sound system and an elevated stage, the music would start, and everyone would spill into the Triangle, partner up, and dance in one big hoedown. I remember whirling around to the Virginia reel and doing do-si-dos to the caller's pace until I was dizzy. Later, after the fireworks, we'd stroll home and I'd collapse in bed. One of the best things about our neighborhood every other day of the year was that it was within walking distance of downtown Media, a unique little suburban metropolis. Media's main drag, State Street, is lined with dozens of boutiques, a lively restaurant and bar scene, and not one, but 2 5 and 10 stores. A massive stately courthouse, Media is the county seat of Delaware County, spans at least 4 square blocks, anchoring the downtown and bringing a swell of lawyers and workers to town each day. There's a 1927 vaudeville theater that's been restored, a local newspaper, the town talk, and even a working trolley. You can distinguish the locals by how deftly they swerve their cars to avoid it when it glides down State Street. There are annual events like the Media 5-mile race, a tradition since 1979, and Super Sunday, the town's annual flea market, from which I once procured a T-shirt sporting Media's slogan, "Everybody's Hometown." I went to an excellent public school that was academically rigorous and had a diverse student body. My teenage memories are those of marching band, football games, and sneaking out to drink Keystone Light in the woods behind our house. More than 25 years later, my high school English teacher still sends me her recommended reading list every summer. Although I am a city girl now, my parents still live in Media, and I visit them often. It's rare that I bring a visitor home who doesn't remark on how central casting it all seems. In the mid-1990s, it actually was central casting. Television producers used exterior shots of our house for the opening credits of a short-lived NBC sitcom called Minor Adjustments. Once, after I invited a former boss over for dinner while he was visiting the area, he chided me about an upbringing that was almost comically idyllic. "How's everything in Grover's Corner?" he'd ask from then on whenever I returned to the New York office from a visit home. But things have changed. Bowling Green's 4th of July picnic has been moved to a block party in September, because people started wanting to go to their beach houses for the holiday instead. The square dance caller has been replaced with an iPod playlist, and food safety concerns have led to new rules requiring all the dishes be kept on ice. Parents now accompany their kids to the bus stop every morning. I used to walk alone. In the late 1990s, despite a protracted and emotional fight from the residents, a developer turned a big estate that abutted one edge of the neighborhood into a subdivision of 43 luxury homes. A Starbucks now sits just outside the neighborhood. Our country's suburbs have changed during that time, too. Most of today's suburbs do not look like media, and it's not just because they don't have a courthouse or a trolley. While people who live in the Northeast are more accustomed to older neighborhoods like Bowling Green, most Americans live in communities built in the last 50 years. And for reasons we'll explore in detail later, these more prevalent suburbs look a lot different. They are bigger, newer. The average age of all housing stock in this country is just 39 years, and feature a more homogeneous style of housing. They're also more spread out. As development has pushed farther outward from urban areas, we have had to travel ever greater distances to get to all the places we need to go. From 1969 to 2009, overall miles traveled per household annually jumped 60%. And today, many suburbs are located so far from their urbs that they're not really a sub of anything. Think of developments in the horse country of Chester County, Pennsylvania, or Loudoun County, Virginia, or the subdivision hamlets surrounded by cornfields in Illinois, or hanging off freeways all throughout the West. Or consider Ridgecrest, California, the only incorporated town along US 395 in Kern County, located halfway between Bakersfield and Death Valley. Ridgecrest is located 112 miles from Bakersfield, the metropolitan area of which it is officially considered a part, giving it the dubious distinction of being the suburb furthest from its urb. Plenty of books have been written about the negative ramifications of this development and why the suburbs are bad for us. But this book isn't about why the suburbs ought to end. Rather, it's about how the suburbs, at least as we know them, are ending. When I started looking into this subject, I knew of some key data points that supported the main thrust of my argument. The more I looked, the more the data from all corners confirmed it. Consider the following. Census data reveals a shift. After 50 years of outward migration, we're starting to move in the other direction. According to census data, population growth in outer suburbs, which had been the engine of residential growth for much of the 2000s, ground to a near halt from 2010 to 2011, increasing by just 0.4%. Cities and high-density inner suburbs, meanwhile, grew twice as fast, marking the first time in 20 years that city growth surpassed that of the exurbs. Our largest cities, meanwhile, grew at a faster rate than any of their suburbs for the first time in 100 years. To some degree, this is a reaction to our recent housing crisis, which saw so much overexpansion, especially in the exurbs. But it's also the first time since the invention of the automobile that our outward migration pattern has reversed. An emerging body of research is starting to bolster the census data. One such study comes from a professor at Tufts University who used data from the U.S. Postal Service to track the number of occupied housing units in the suburbs. As it turns out, whether a house receives mail is one of the only reliable ways to tell whether it's truly occupied. The data showed occupancy declining.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?